Doing great. What's on your mind?
Oh, let's see. So this is Sam. You reached out to me in my DMs and asked if I wanted to join this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did have a couple questions about orthodoxy. We just started talking about the Greek, the schism between the Greek Orthodox and the Russian Orthodox. So my question was, like, how would you advise someone to choose between those two churches? I think you're Russian Orthodox.
I do attend a Russian Orthodox church, but at the stage, even though the two patriarchates are not in communion, they still accept each other's sacraments. So we usually tell people that they go to whatever is available around them, but they would have to make a decision only if there was a excommunication, in which case I would tell people to go with the Russian church, the Serbs, and others that would not go with the EP.
They're still in communion with each other.
They accept each other's sacraments, but they're at the canonical stage of not being in communion. So that they removed each other from the diptychs a couple of years ago, and at this point, either the schism will be healed, or they will excommunicate one another.
So there are just so it's not totally excommunicated yet. It's just
Correct. There's and Orthodox canon law, there's stages to these things, and they're not at that stage. But as I pointed out in DMs, this is not unheard of. There have been many cases in history when patriarchs have been out of communion with one another.
sure. I mean, obviously, the Roman Catholic Church is out of communion, and so I wanted to understand the contrast between the Roman Catholic schism and then the Greek and Russian Orthodox schism, because it seems like well, I guess you wouldn't consider it a schism yet. Is that true?
Not technically yet, but it could progress to that.
So this is the first time I've heard. I have some friends that are Eastern Orthodox, and I've asked them about this, and they haven't explained that to me. So that's good to know. It seemed like there was no distinction between the two kinds of separations. One schism and one, I guess, there's just a spat or
Well, it's
whatever.
not the same as the Catholic situation because the schism with the papacy wasn't just a schism; it ended up being a difference over doctrine and theology. So at this point, there wouldn't be an explicit difference between doctrine and theology between the EP and the MP, unless the EP continues in its pretty hardcore ecumenist type stances, and it has a pretty strong desire, it seems like, to go back to Rome. And I think at that point, if it went in that direction, that would definitely be beyond just schism. It would also be heresy. So for us, those are two different things. They're two different types of sins.
Yeah, and I think you said there's not a difference in doctrine. I understand that's an important term of art. The principal cause of the separation being the powers of the ecumenical patriarch. Is that right?
Oh, well, in terms of this situation, has to do with a reversal of stance on the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. So the EP formerly supported the Orthodox Canonical Church under Metropolitan Onufri, and then reversed his stance when the State Department put pressure on him. So the CIA and the State Department went in and set up a schismatic fake Orthodox Church, and then pressured the EP to support it, which was all a flip from what he previously said and did. So, at the level of state interference and jurisdictional squabbles, that's where we're at. It's not a heresy per se, although if it persists and it goes in the direction that the schismatic church in the Ukraine wants, it would actually be heresy because they're already pushing a lot of heretical ideas.
Which church are you saying is pushing radical ideas? The Greek Orthodox, the
No,
ecumenical
I
church?
said in the Ukraine, the State Department and the CIA went in and set up a schismatic Orthodox church founded by people who were previously rejected, like Duminko, as not even being validly ordained. The EP previously rejected any of that and supported the canonical Orthodox Church in Ukraine. And so it reversed its stance and now supports the open schismatic group that the CIA openly set up. So that's
This
the EP's mistake, and it was done at the behest of the State Department and the CIA forcing and pushing the EP to do so.
And you said that's open that the CIA and State Department did that, or that's just
Yeah, you
something.
can go read the public. They even had it on their website. They congratulated the State Department congratulated the schismatic Ukraine church from being set up for being set up, I should say. And the former CIA head flew over there and gave rewards to the Tumenko schismatic. That's the head of it.
And then isn't like the Russian Orthodox Church setting up churches in Africa now as well? I believe I read that.
Yeah, I mean, the Russian church has mission churches everywhere. Europe, Africa, France. I mean, there's a lot of growth of the church set in France now that the
Oh,
Roman Catholic churches are basically going out of business.
how big of a deal do you think? Excuse me, my son's in the background. How big of a deal you think it is that the Russian Orthodox and the Greek Orthodox Church don't commune with each other?
Again, I gave you, there's multiple examples where this has happened in church history, like the Meletian Schism in the fourth century. You have the Macedonian Schism that I sent you an article about. You have a more recent healing of a schism, Bulgarian Schism. I mean, all these things have happened multiple times in the first millennium and the second millennium of Christianity. So it's unfortunate, but it's pretty common in church history.
Sure.
Do you
Okay.
find that to be a defeater? Do you think that the Lutheran Missouri Synod splitting from the others is that a defeat of Lutheranism?
Oh, well, so the way you explained it, it's not a defeater until unless there's a complete schism. It wouldn't be a defeater. However, that would not be an issue for Protestants as we have a different idea of what the church is. So Protestants don't have institutional the fact that Protestants all don't share in the same institution is kind of like the definition of Protestantism almost. So I don't think that would be an issue for Protestants. But if
So you would that mean that Protestants don't have normative authority?
why do you ask?
Well, the idea of being able to excommunicate some group presupposes that another group has or believes they have normative authority. And so that means that you can bind people's conscience to a decision in an ethical way. So in ethics, normativity has to do with oughts and binding people to moral oughts. But since Protestantism has no quote institution, as you said, that's kind of a single institution, it would seem to follow that there's not really any normative authority, and so there's not really anything that's any kind of sensible excommunication or any kind of real sensible notion of schism.
No notion of schism. Well, so let's see. So you do have different Protestant churches. Some have open communion, some have closed communion, and so um,
Yeah, so that would speak to my point that there's no normative authority.
like for example, the LCMS, communion. You would not take communion with someone unless you shared the same doctrine. Is the point? It's a part of it is a showing of doctrinal unity.
Do you think that the church fathers of the Council of Nicaea believe the same thing as the Lutheran Missouri Synod?
Do I believe the church fathers at the Council of Nicaea believe the same thing as the LCMS? I imagine that there are
Yeah.
differences.
Do you think they were Christians? Do you think that they had normative authority or that they believed that they could excommunicate people like?
Well, so excommunication would mean that you do not allow them to take communion from your church.
Well, yeah, you kick them out, right? So you hand them over to Satan, like Paul says to the Corinthians.
Well, if you refuse someone communion, then you're not having communion with them.
Well, that's not all that's in excommunication. You're also banned from the church and all the sacraments. So it's not just communion; it's any sacrament like confession, or even marriage. So you don't get any of the church's sacraments if you're excommunicated. But what I'm getting at is if the church at Nicaea, as an example, believed that they had normative authority to excommunicate people from the church, meaning that they're banned and they're outside of it, then they had normative authority. How come your church doesn't have normative of authority as a principle operating in it when the church fathers at Nicaea thought they had? It seems like it's a totally different group, a totally different church.
Let's see. So whether something is right or wrong or true or false doesn't depend on our ability to discern it. So for example, so I would subscribe to the First Council of Nicaea not because the church said it. However, I would subscribe.
Yeah, that's not addressing what I asked you. So remember when you said philosophy was a crap discipline?
Yes.
This is where you should have learned from it because you would understand what normative authority is. It means the ability to bind people to an ought, like for example, and to make an analogy, the Supreme Court interprets the Constitution, right? Now we might disagree with them, but at least they in the land have the authority to bind people to some decision about the documents of the Constitution. And I'm saying that it's pretty clear from Nicaea that the church fathers at that council, even if you don't agree with them, they believe that they had the authority to bind people to the decisions of Nicaea and excommunicate all of Arius's followers and Arius himself. And I'm saying your church does not have that principle of normative authority at all operating in it by your own admission. So it seems like it's a totally different church.
It is a different institution, but I don't think we would disagree with I don't think we would disagree agree with each other on the point that yeah, I don't think something is true because the LCMS says it's true, or because the Russian Orthodox Church or the First Council of Nicaea says it.
Okay, that has nothing to do with normative authority. Whether that body of people believe that they have the ability to bind people to a decision. I'm not asking whether you think it's true or false. I'm asking whether you think or admit that they had that in their minds as something that they could do.
Oh, perhaps they did not, but I'm not concerned with what they believed.
Oh my God. So you're not concerned with what Nicaea believes?
That's correct. Yes.
Wow. Well, I mean, it's funny because at least Luther was concerned with what Nicaea believed because he believed himself to be, it's in some sense, a Nicene Christian. So at least you're pretty honest about what being completely divorced from what the Council of Nicaea taught. You don't care.
Well, I care to the extent that I that I believe it. So it's not true from the fact that it was voted on by a bunch of bishops.
Yeah, you're going away from, yeah, it has nothing to, again, maybe if you'd had philosophy, you would know the difference between certitude and normative authority. They're two different things. You keep going back to certitude, which is not what I'm asking you. I'm asking you if the council fathers believed that they had normative authority, that they could bind people's decisions, even if you think it's wrong, they believed if they excommunicate Arius and his followers, they believe they have the authority to do that. And you admitted that your church or your group doesn't really operate that way and is a different institution. So to me, that sounds like you're a sectarian and you're not actually in any historical church.
Let's see. Um, so as you point out, I'm not a respecter of the discipline of philosophy. I think you can get carried away with these abstract terms and end up lost from them. People I respect historically aren't people of the philosophical discipline. So that's true. I think
Yeah, but maybe that's from coming from a place of your own pride and ignorance because you would know the difference between what I'm talking about instead of just shitting on people's lifetime study and research out of the gates when you don't know anything about it. So it's just funny to me that you came into the DMs talking shit about how I don't have any background that's any worth anything. And that when you come to the debate to discuss stuff, you can't make basic distinctions between individual certitude and the idea of normativity.
yeah. So I think if you can't explain something, like Feynman said, explain it to a child, then maybe you don't understand it yourself. That's sort of the
And I don't understand the difference between normativity and certitude, even though I explained it multiple times. It's the difference between
so
individual, abstract, knowledge, conceptual objectivity, that kind of stuff, versus a body of people binding other people to a decision. Those are two different things.
yeah. So suppose the Council of Nicaea had voted differently. What would I have? Would you do with that?
How is that relevant to what we're talking about? That's not even what happened.
Suppose they had voted differently than they did. Then tell me about this process of binding one's conscience.
Again, like that's not it's missing the point of what I'm arguing. Again, you can't you literally can't make this distinction. I don't think you understand the difference. Do you understand the difference between me saying 2 plus 2 equals 4 and a body of people saying that you ought to believe that 2 plus 2 is 4? Those are two different things. Do you understand that in the Reformation, there's this doctrine of the freedom of conscience?
Mhm.
And the Reformed confessions, the Lutheran confessions, they all talk about the right of private interpretation, the freedom of conscience, and the freedom of worship. Those are classical Reformation ideas. Those do not line up with the church of the first 1,000 years, as an example, because the church of the first 1,000 years consistently in the ecumenical councils binds people to those decisions. I don't care whether you think it's wrong or right. I'm making a different point that that body of people, that historical entity, the church, believed and acted as if they had normative authority, whether it's wrong or right. They believed and acted that way, correct?
I mean, we can stipulate that. I'm fine with that.
So if they had this feature, which again, if you look at Paul's letters to the Corinthians, he tells the Corinthians to excommunicate and throw out the people that don't live according to the Christian principles. He tells them to hand them over to Satan, kick them out of the church because they're causing a ruckus at the Lord's Supper, they're not reverencing it, etc. So there's excommunication for the church as a normative principle and power that they have. This is something that exists all the way up until the Reformation, calling into question this idea and getting rid of the notion of normativity. It's not a question of individual certitude about what's right or wrong. It's a question of historical bodies of people believing and calling people out and excommunicating them. So the point then is Lutheranism is not the historical church because it rejects the church having normative authority.
So I don't think the church has ever. So when you say normative authority, uh, so something is decided to be right or wrong based on the vote of a council.
Oh my gosh. Are you serious? See, this is why it doesn't make sense for people like you to be so arrogant and come into my DMs and talk so much shit. And after the fourth explanation, you still don't understand what I'm saying.
So you actually came into my DMs as a matter of
No, well, you came on to the comments talking shit about me
yes.
and how bad I was and how nasty I was. And then in the comments, I have a crap discipline of philosophy. And you
Say
can't
again.
make a basic distinction. You
Are
said
you
I've
there?
studied a crap discipline.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Hello.
Can you hear me? Can anyone else hear me?
Hello.
All right. Can you all hear me? We're just going to move on. It's a complete waste of time.